Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our fourth annual winter webinar series. Um, this is sponsored by the Chatham Cultural Council, which we give many thanks to. We have a great lineup for our next 2 months to keep you busy during these snowy Saturdays. And I'm happy to introduce today Julie Baca, our Director of Land Stewardship. And since joining us, Julie has really been able to increase all of our land stewardship activities, particularly our restoration projects. And I'm so pleased to have her with us today. There will be time at the end of the presentation for some questions and answers. So thanks again for joining us. And I'm going to be letting actually a few more people into the room who are joining us um, right now. So when you're ready, Julie, you can get started.
All right, good morning, everyone. Um, can everyone see the slides fine and hear me fine?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Um, so today I'll be talking about some of my favorite work at Chatham Conservation Foundation, which is our restoration projects, and I will be highlighting half of our active projects. In case there's anyone on who's not super familiar with Chatham Conservation Foundation, I just wanted to go over a little bit of what we manage. So we conserve around 800 acres of land in Chatham and a tiny bit in Harwich. Um, on this map, what you see in dark green is land that we own, and that's over 600 acres. The rest of the land that we protect is by conservation restriction. This is conservation restrictions are legal documents that follow land in perpetuity. They restrict what can be done on the land in order to maintain the conservation values. So we hold conservation restrictions both on private properties, so ones that are crosshatched but have a white background, and on town properties, which are crosshatched um, with a light green background on this map. And then the remaining light green land you see on this map is town of Chatham open space. Not all of it is probably that you see on this map is like officially protected as conservation land. Um, about a year ago, we did an ecological assessment of our assemblages of land that we own in order to help us prioritize our work on the properties and just to learn a little bit more, synthesize better what we own. And here's just some interesting findings from that work. Um, so 82% of CCF's assemblages contain wetlands or buffers to wetlands. It's not, I guess, hugely surprising in Chatham because we have so much water. And also, people like to donate conservation land that they cannot develop, which would be wetland. Um, so over half of the acreage we own, 346 acres, is considered specialized habitat. We use state maps in order to make this classification. We were looking at the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Programs maps for priority and estimated habitat of rare species. And we were also looking at the state's collection of maps called biomap, which are emphasize land that is most important for the protection of biodiversity. And 30 of our assemblages, we have, I think, about 95 assemblages of properties. These are like, we may have gotten land at different points in time, but these are where we have a group of conservation land, we call that an assemblage. So 30 of those, about a third of our assemblages, have three or more habitats on them, and having multiple habitats in an area is also important for biodiversity. In the pie chart over here, you see a breakdown of the different types of habitat we have on our assemblages. So the number of assemblages with each type of habitat. You'll notice that pine oak woodland and freshwater wetlands are the most common habitat on our properties, followed by salt marsh and a variety of other habitats. There are a couple of habitats on here that are more rare, but we are very happy to be able to protect because they're very important for biodiversity and rare species in this area. And so those are coastal plain pond shorelines and vernal pools. This map shows the 8 active restorations we have ongoing at the moment. I'll talk just briefly about all of them, but we're going to go more into depth on 4 of these. What we have labeled as number 1 here is at our Barkley assemblage where we have the Barkley Trail System. This is right in front of the parking lot there. We've been trying to manage the knotweed, which is a never-ending task. We have been encouraged by seeing improvement in biodiversity in this area. It's not just a monocultural culture of knotweed anymore, but we still have a lot of work to do there. Number 2 is at a property we inherited about 5 years ago, which we refer to as a divine property. It involved a house and 2 undeveloped house lots. Residential properties often have had a lot of disturbance and are very prone to invasive species, inundation. And so we've been working to kind of bring this property back to a cleaner state and reestablish native habitats on that property. Number 3, I don't know if I'm supposed to pick favorites, but it may be my favorite restoration project that I've worked on in Chatham, in part because it was already ongoing when I started at Chatham. So I've been working on it the whole time I've been with CCF. And I can kind of see a lot of progress. It's only a half-acre parcel. We call it Menikesh. It's at the corner of Shore Road and Old Harbor Road. And we've made a lot of progress in taking an area that had very heavy, like tree, understory, and ground cover invasive species status. Now you'll see there's a lot of native meadow in there, and we have it on a trajectory to become more native dominated forest land again. And most of that property is now at a maintenance stage, although we're still plugging along in new areas. 4 is down here off our Stage Harbor Road, our Mill Pond Overlook project. I will talk about that in more depth soon. I will also talk in more depth about the 5th restoration project up here, the Nickerson property, as well as number 6, which is the mini meadow at our office. If you are Chatham residents, you probably have driven by the 7th restoration project listed here, which is our Vanderbilt property. It's at the corner of Old Queen Anne Road and Skyline Drive. We're on a slow, steady path to take an area that was really dominated by um, porcelain and bittersweet, English ivy, and non-native maples, and bring that primarily into a little patch of native meadow. Um, and then the final restoration project that we've been actively working on is at Frostfish Creek, and I will be talking about that in more detail as well. So our first stop is at our office, 540 Main Street, where we have been working on primarily on the area in front of our office, which we also expanded this year. So this is what we call the mini meadow on Main Street. This project just started before I joined CCF. CCF moved into the Mayo House for their office space around 2018. At the time, the landscaping was just regular yard, lawn, and there was also a Bradford pear out front, which is a highly invasive non-native tree. And so the trustees at the time did not feel that this really matched the values of the organization. They wanted to have a landscape with native plants, something that could support, even though we're in a highly developed area on Main Street, support a little more biodiversity. And that could be like a um, good educational tool of what native landscaping looks like. Um, Also, they didn't want to have to put in a lot of inputs. They didn't want to have to fertilize this or use a lot of water on this landscape. Um, this was the planting layout was designed by trustees Kathy Weston and Uni Burley, and they decided that the matrix plants, the most predominant plants, would be prairie drop seed, the grass shown here, strawberries, and then butterfly milkweed, which I'm sure you've noticed if you've walked by our office in July. There's a big burst of orange color. And then there are some less frequent species added in. So here's a look at what it looked like before they undertook this initiative. Although the Bradford pear, you can see kind of where the stump was. That was already removed at the point of this picture. And then here's a look at how the meadow was doing this summer. So at this point, this front area of the meadow doesn't take too much maintenance. We have a handful of small volunteer projects each year, primarily to do weeding. When there's been a lawn, the weeds, including the long grasses, do stay pretty persistent. And I'm pretty proud that even though we've had these really droughty summers, we have barely watered this. So I guess we wanted to perk things up for one of Kathy's presentations. So I ran the irrigation for like 2 hours this summer, but that's it. So, part of the purpose is you're choosing plants that do well in our habitat and do not need a lot of extra support. This year we also decided to do a push forward to renovate the right side of the building. So this whole hillside here was covered with English ivy with various other invasives peppered in. And so we removed all that, but the burlap is to kind of hold the soil since it's on a fairly steep slope here. while the vegetation establishes. We can remove it once there's more root structure in the area. And we planted various shrubs and herbaceous plants and grasses, including shrubs up on this hillside and then grasses on the lower area here. This year we'll be adding, hopefully we're trying to grow plugs of purple love grass and pathrush to help us fill in the area with grasses, the bare areas, and further stabilize the area. Those seeds are like dust. They're so tiny. They need light to germinate. We were nervous that we were going to get a good outcome just throwing them on the ground. So we're also growing plugs. And these two pictures off to the right-hand side were taken by my colleague Eli. It's just some of an example of what this little tiny habitat in a very developed area can attract. Obviously, we have a lot of butterfly milkweed, which is a host for the monarch butterflies. So we're very happy to see that they're using it. This is a monarch caterpillar right here. This was a spring peeper. We are kind of puzzled like what wetland it was coming to us from, maybe from the golf course. But it was fun we didn't expect to find that on Main Street. So next we'll move up to North Chatham off of Route 28. We have a property referred to as the Nickerson property, just before you get to like the Training Field Road, Box Hill Road intersection. I took this picture this fall. You can faintly see a path we mowed through the meadow, which it's the first time we had mowed a path. The intention is to open this path to the public. It hasn't officially opened to the public yet, but really hope that can happen this year. So we call this the Nickerson property because it is the site of the homestead of William and Anne Nickerson, who were the first European settlers in Chatham. And the Nickerson Family Association, which is located directly next to this property, they requested to conduct an archaeological dig on CCF property where they highly suspected the home site was. So CCF did give them permission to do this, and I think most of the digging primarily took place in 2018 and 2019. And they did find a lot of evidence of the home site, including like outlines of the home and hearths and a barn and a furnace area, various features that they would like to be able to highlight for the public. And actually, I think it's our last webinar this year. Gary Nickerson, who I think spent just about every day of the dig on site, is going, and he's a fabulous speaker about the dig. He is going to give a presentation on it in our last webinar this year. But after they had dug up this whole area, it needed restoration to. I mean, fortunately, you can see there are cedars. I think the understory, I wasn't working at CCF yet when the dig happened, but I'm pretty sure the understory was primarily non-native vegetation that they had to clear. And CCF saw an opportunity. Well, while this area needs to be restored, what about the rest of the property? You can vaguely see in the background of this picture of the dig, which is towards the back of our property looking out towards Route 28. I mean, I guess you can't tell from this picture that it's non-native vegetation, but we were talking, you would have been very hard pressed to find a native plant in there. So CCF decided to compile restoring the dig site with restoring the area between the dig site and Route 28. Um, and they got CPC funding to do this. Uh, they hired Blue Flax. This is a pretty big undertaking. think I think it's about 3/4 of an acre. Um, and so they brought in professionals to give us a hand with this work. You can see this picture down on the bottom left, um, with which is so Blue Flax came in with large equipment. They basically mulched everything that was down in this area with a flail mower. They left the mulch for a year. They wanted to smother resprouts with it. Um, and then after a year, they removed it and seeded into meadow grasses. A number, hundreds of shrubs were also added to the area, such as this sweet pepper bush shown on the right-hand side here. And these are various shrubs in the smaller picture of shrubbery added into the dig site. So here's a look at what it looked like pre-restoration. I told you it was bad. Mostly we were talking about porcelainberry on top of honeysuckle shrubs, black locust trees, and various other non-native plants. And you can see this picture is from 2002. So this was a problem that went back a very long time. Here is a picture from a similar perspective, looking from Route 28, taken this summer. So we do have meadow grasses established, still some black-eyed Susan showing up. Oh, a lot of the shrubbery is over to this left-hand side. Some trees were also added, like you'll see an oak here. There are also cedar trees. We added a few other oaks. But ultimately this is supposed to stay a meadow habitat down in the lower area here. I think one of our big achievements in 2025 was finally getting some native grasses to establish in the dig site. We really struggled with this over multiple years. We just were not having the seed mix grow. Instead, velvet grass, which is a very persistent non-native grass, was coming in heavy, and we tried various things, including raking out truckloads of it with volunteers and AmeriCorps members, but really to very little avail. I eventually decided to lay down black landscape fabric over the area, leave it for most of a summer and into the next spring. And then we threw down seed without, usually you would stir up the soil a little bit to prepare a seed bed. We did not want to risk stirring up more velvet grass seeds, which I'm sure we have plenty of a seed bank in the soil here. And we just threw it on top. Definitely was far from perfect, but we got way more grasses to establish than we have yet. And it's something we can work with. I think we'll do some more overseeding this spring. We did a little bit of plugging with little blue stem this fall that we grew from seeds we collected on our property, including this property. We're going to try to ramp up our production of little blue stem plugs this year to better assist. But we got this nice boost from a native plant species that wasn't in the seed mix, but came in very heavy. So I've kind of given you a magnified picture of it in the lower right-hand corner here. It's called Sweet Everlasting. And I've seen it coming up a lot. I don't know if it's been good years for it or what is going on, but I've noticed it coming up a lot in Chatham and in other parts of the Cape this year. And another little pleasant surprise that a couple of us noticed that when we were walking through this area where it came in heavy, really, I don't know if this is how it got its name. It really smells like maple syrup is in the air. So opening this area to the public has really been kind of delayed by not being able to get grasses to establish in the dig area. So if things are going continue on a positive trajectory. Hopefully, we can open that trail this year. And the Nickerson Family Association will be adding the QR code type um, markers in the area so that people can use their phones to get information on where different features they identified in the dig are on the site. So now we're moving down off of Stage Harbor Road, next to the Atwood Museum, our Mill Pond Overlook Trail. So this is looking down the trail from Stage Harbor Road. Um, I am losing track of time now, but I think we opened the trail about 3 years ago. So here's our trail map of the area. I think it's about a half mile if you go out and back on this trail. At the end, there are peaks of the Mitchell River. Um, I've learned that people have very different ideas of view, like what it means to have a overlook view than I do. I more for the lighter touch. You don't need to see the whole water, but it's particularly good view at in the winter time. Um, and frankly, one reason why I chose this property for a new trail when CCF wanted to establish a new trail was because it was not in pristine condition as far as um, vegetation goes. Although I will say the marsh is basically all natively vegetated. Um, but we have, if you walk through there, you probably have noticed, we probably got about 2 acres at the front here that is dominated by honeysuckle and porcelainberry, which are two very prominent invasive plant species in the Chatham area on Cape. Um, and there are some nice large native trees left, especially as you start moving towards the Mitchell River, but still the understory remains very much dominated by invasive plant species. So I didn't really want to disturb more pristine habitats, but also this gave us better access to start doing some restoration on this property. And we've been primarily focusing on what I call the panhandle, the narrow 30-foot wide strip we have leading from Stage Harbor Road back to the rest of the property. Because this is such a big undertaking, we have to do it in bites. So you can see on the upper left-hand side, this was when we were just cutting the trail with the help of AmeriCorps Cape Cod. So this panhandle was just covered in honeysuckle and privet and porcelainberry and bittersweet. When you got up towards the road, it's basically a forest for privet, very tall privet. Going down to the lower left-hand corner, this was the spring after we cut the trail. We added a lot of native shrubbery among the privet that we cut through. I think this was 2 years later. We're looking from a little lower down the trail. We've now added shrubs, done clearing and added shrubs on both sides of the trail along the panhandle. This picture on the right-hand side, I think I put in because we'll take our little victories. There are small patches where there are already existing native plants. And I really like to just let those flourish and work with what we have. So an example is the sweet fern right here. You can also see it in this picture with the wheelbarrow along the sides of the path. So that was already there. Um, and it's probably my favorite part of the path. If you ever think, oh, the path is pretty narrow here, it's because I was sad about cutting back the sweet fern. Um, and there are other examples of this. Like there was a very large, well, relatively large for the tree, alternate leaf dogwood, which is a native dogwood species in this area. So a little further up the hill from the wheelbarrow in this picture. And we've really been able to open that up and let that do its thing. So well, not in 2025, but in 2024, our biggest volunteer project that year was adding 3 rain gardens along the trail in this panhandle area at Mill Pond Overlook to help us with water management. Um, because the property is so narrow there, we didn't really have room, and because the topography kind of goes up on either side of the trail, we didn't have room to kind of switch back it or something. So the trail just goes straight down the slope, and so does the water. So we added water bars to direct water into these rain gardens, where the water would have time to infiltrate into the soil, and where we added a variety of plants that can tolerate both wet and dry conditions. I will say it's still a work in progress. We have some regrading to do on the trail um, to get even more of the water to shed towards the rain gardens. But we have lessened the erosion on the trail to some extent with this project, and just added a variety of plants that weren't on this property before these efforts. So our before picture, and this is a museum right in the background here. And then this summer, this is where we're at with the trail. Um, you see in the foreground, there's this black landscaping fabric. The tool we very commonly use to smother challenging vegetation and prepare an area for planting. So the big challenge right here is Canada thistle, which spreads by rhizomes. So like underground roots. And every time you hack up those underground roots, it can just create a new plant or create an independent plant. Um, so which makes it very difficult to deal with. So I'm seeing if we can wear it out by totally starving it of light. I think we're going to, and this is the first place where we really tried to battle it. So we're definitely learning as we go here. So I think we'll probably peel back an area or maybe the whole area, go into grassing and see what happens before we decide to do some planting. If thistle starts popping up like crazy again, we might have to just go put the fabric back down and wait a little longer. So another thing we did this year was to add plant tags. So some of these tags, like on the Eastern red cedar pictured here, are on plants that establish naturally in the property, and we labeled both native, or we labeled native, non-native, and invasive plants. It says on the tag what category they fall into. We also added labels to plants we have added in our restoration work, such as this inkberry pictured on the right-hand side. Another initiative this year. So there are not many native plant species, as I said, is on this property is dominated by non-native species. But some of the things you'll still find are shadbush, which is one of my favorite plants, um, high bush blueberries, and arrowwood viburnum, as well as, like I said, some large native trees. So we wanted to open up around some of these plants, give them a better chance to thrive, and kind of highlight them for the public who's using our trail. Um, so in the middle here, you'll see a shad bush, and we planted Pennsylvania sedge plugs around it. Um, we just did the planting this fall, but the bunnies and deer have kept them pretty well mowed. We'll see how they progress if they can get past a certain stage. And then over to the right-hand side here, we have this really stellar white oak along the trail that we also cleared in front of and added Pennsylvania sedge. Over on the left here is Eli posing with some ginormous, and Eli's our land stewardship technician. He's posing with some ginormous porcelainberry roots that he dug up. So this was a bigger area that we opened up. It's next to a lovely sprawling black cherry tree, and there are, I think, 4 viburnums in this area and a high bush blueberry bush. We wanted to open up the whole area. Unfortunately, once we revealed the viburnums, maybe they would have done this anyways, but the bunnies were like, gee, thanks. You made this really easy to us, and started to eat the bark off of all the young shoots. But I am confident they'll put out new shoots. We have since fenced them too. But we put down a seed mix in this area. We're trying a new mixture of creeping red fescue, autumn bent grass, path rush, and um, purple love grass, which are those last two are the two I said we are growing plugs for the Mayo house for. But here we did just try throwing them down on the soil and not covering them this fall. Um, the path rush does need full stratification. It needs to go through a cool period, so we had to do that in the fall. So we'll see how it works out. We're doing a little experiment there, and we're also going to see if we have room to add a few more shrubs or a tree in that area. So in 2026, I hope to pick a few other sites. We found when we were just doing some vine trimming, we found a really big viburnum I'd like to open up, and we have another area with some high bush blueberry. So hopefully we'll do a little more pocket clearing. So lastly, I'll talk about our Frostfish Creek project. This is a view from our trail system, which many of you might have visited. Frostfish Creek is in this area I circled in blue here. So it's located off of Riders Cove, which is part of Pleasant Bay. And technically, Frostfish Creek kind of starts at this opening at Riders Cove. Our team has been focusing on the area south of Route 28, which is restricted from normal flow. Here's an aerial image of the area. So Route 28 is right here. This is what we call Outer Frostfish Creek, which is normally connected without restrictions to Riders Cove. And then this is Inner Frostfish Creek, which is restricted by Route 28 and some other infrastructure. So Inner Frostfish Creek, and then what we call the bog area, although technically it's not, like ecologically, it's not technically a bog. Just for a little more orientation, this is the middle school here in Kroll Road. So I'll introduce you to, if you don't know of it, I recommend checking out surf post-glacial surficial geology maps. So these show deposits after the glaciers, like well after the glaciers retreated. And I like to look at these maps um, in order to tell where cranberry bog production happened in the past. So the cranberry bog production is, or cranberry bog areas are shown in this purpley maroon color. So we can see that that whole area I was referring to as the bog was in production at one point in time, as well as a lot of area along Inner Phosphorus Creek and on the western side of Coal Road, which is hydrologically connected to Phosphorus Creek. On these maps, we can also see areas of artificial fill. They're tinier, so it might be a little hard for you to see, but those are in brown. So we can see that there's artificial fill at this road crossing where it crosses over Phosphorus Creek, um, as well as two road crossings of smaller creeks um, where Crow Road is. So there's a crossing here and a crossing here. Um, and this picture over on the right-hand side is an aerial image from 1938. So you can really see the bog platforms, both along the creek and the cranberry bog platforms, that is, and in what we call the bog area. One of our trustees did find on the Registry of Deeds, she's found a plan from the late 1800s that showed restrictions. I'll go over them. Restrictions related to this cranberry bog farming at that time. So it goes back at least until the 1800s. Um, I'm I'm not sure when it all ended. I think the last part to be abandoned for cranberry bog production was this upper bog area, and that happened around the time that CCF took over ownership of the area, and that was in the very late 60s. Um, so just as a little aside, CCF owns much of, well, I'll move on. You can see CCF owns a lot of areas. So everything outlined in green here is owned by CCF. So we own a lot of area around the creek. And this did come through various acquisitions, although the majority of the land was acquired in the late 1960s, like I said. And it was CCF's first large fundraiser, and a very big deal. They had to raise about $27,000. Um, so on this map, um, you can, so like I said, we own a lot of land around Phosphorus Creek. So this Phosphorus Creek assemblage, as we call it, has, I think it's about 43 acres of land. And then to the west of Crow Road, we also own a lot of land, about 35 acres. And as I said before, this is hydrologically connected to Phosphorus Creek. The white line you see here is our walking trail through the area. And I'll go over some of the remnant restrictions from cranberry bog farming, and I guess the road ones. I don't know if I could call them remnant because we still use these roads today. So first we have the restriction at Route 28. There's only two functioning small pipes. So I think they're in like this 16 to 24 inch range conveying water under Route 28. So about 200 feet southwest of Route 28, we have this other restriction that is related to the cranberry bog farming. So there is a earthen berm with this water control structure. And I think that's about a 36-inch pipe through that water control structure. So both of these restrictions here serve to significantly reduce the tidal flow in this area. So this map that just popped up here, or this graph, shows tidal data collected by Sustainable Coastal Solutions for the area. So the blue line here, which shows tidal amplitude. So the blue line here is for out in Riders Cove without any restrictions. The red line is when we get into this impounded area in between Route 28 and what I just call the lower berm. So you can see that there's a drastic decrease in tidal range just going through the Route 28 culverts. So that's the change from this blue line to the red line. And then the green line and the dotted black line here, those that recorded data for those lines were recorded inside Inner Phosphorus Creek. So after both the Route 28 and lower burn restrictions, you can see that the tide is further attenuated by that lower burn restriction. And this can be very detrimental to the ecological system for a few reasons. It very much limits where salt marsh can be, and it prevents tidal flushing and can lead to a poor water quality. Also, as you can imagine, these very small pipes keep larger fish from passing freely into this area. So the last restriction I'll show a picture for in this system is what we call the weir. You do walk over this earthen berm if you walk our trail towards Meadowbrook Road. So this, again, is a legacy of cranberry farming, and it keeps this bog area artificially maintained as fresh water. The water is somewhat saline up to the point of this weir. But two other restrictions that I don't have pictures of, but are also involved are where I mentioned there is the two crossings at Crow Road. There are culverts under Crow Road. So it's become increasingly common in Massachusetts to look at removing past restrictions or widening past restrictions from road crossings and from cranberry bog farming or from industry that might have put in dams in order to improve ecology along waterways. And so we have been working with a host of partners in order to examine what it would mean to remove or improve restrictions in the Phosphorus Creek system. So we've been working with the town of Chatham. You know, they would be the people permitting this project, applying for permits for this project and overseeing construction. And they're representing the interests of the town. The Division of Ecological Restoration, which is a state entity, they provide funding and technical services to projects to restore cranberry bogs and to remove restrictions like dams. Mass DOT, they control Route 28, so they need to be involved in the project. We have gotten a lot of funding from the United States Department of Agricultural, Natural Resource and Conservation Service. And Cape Cod Conservation District provides technical and funding support to this project. They're very strong advocates of this project, and definitely provide support in seeking funding and just advising on this project. So the goals in removing restrictions or widening restrictions would be to increase salt marsh and ecosystem resilience. There is a little bit of salt marsh in Interphosphorus Creek now, but substantially less than there could be. And it's also really showing evidence of subsidence and just impairment. We hope to improve water quality. Interphosphorus Creek is currently impaired, both for nutrients and for bacteria. We would like to improve fish and shellfish habitat. Um, as I said, the restrictions really limit larger fish getting into the area. Also, whatever is living there would have to be able to tolerate kind of the extreme conditions, water quality, lack of oxygen at times, um, reduced salinity, um, in order to live there. And it's also pretty poor or very poor shellfish habitat, right now. Um, we also would hope to expand recreational opportunities. I really do not recommend anyone recreate in Interphosphorus Creek right now because of the water quality and also the 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 lower berm culvert could be dangerous to swim or fall in the water nearby. So I mean, I'm sure you've seen recreation opportunities expand at Muddy Creek. There would be a similar hope here. So projects like this, they take a long time, and um, CCF has been kind of examining this since 2018 when they hired the Association to Preserve Cape Cod in order to do a preliminary assessment of um, whether this area was a candidate for restoration. And based on that report, CCF decided to apply for and they received a CPC grant in 2021 to start working on the project. They also applied for a DER priority project designation, um, and received that priority project designation in DER, in 2022. And as I said, this kind of prioritizes you for getting technical assistance from DER and funding. At the same time, Mass DOT also received a priority project designation for the Phosphorus Creek area. So we had a joint kickoff meeting with DER, other stakeholders, and Mass DOT in 2022. That's when things really launched. In early 2023, CCF used the CPC funding to hire a project manager. Some of the CPC funding, a lot of it was used for paying for modeling and such. But we hired Carol Ridley, who is very experienced in projects like this. She worked with the town on the Muddy Creek project, and she's been involved with a very large Herring River project up in Wellfleet. So Carol really helped to work with CCF and the town to bring in, and just the rest of our partner group to bring in more funds to this project so we could really start conducting assessments to evaluate the opportunities for this area. So to date, we've received hundreds of thousands of dollars from NRCS and DER. And so with DER funding in 2024, we conducted, or we hired a contractor, Fuss and O'Neill, to complete a baseline of the bog area. We also, starting in 2023, started collecting water quality data. We've done that for the past 3 years, and we continue to do that going forward. And that was to help inform a baseline assessment of the water quality in Interphosphorus Creek and also to inform water quality modeling that we had completed to predict how things might change if we um, alter some of these restrictions. Um, we've also since had a hydrodynamic model conducted for the area, and just in this past year, wetlands and fisheries assessments were conducted along the creek. Um, so now looking forward, the team is moving towards for the Route 28 restriction design, permitting, and receiving cost estimates and looking for funding for this work. Um, and currently we're still waiting for an expanded hydrodynamic model to include the bog and for an assessment by Fuss and O'Neill um, on what our options are for um, the weir restriction that keeps the bog artificially as fresh water. And based on that information, we'll be making decisions on how CCF is the owners of that restriction of how we would like to move forward. Um, so, as you might guess, looking at this timeline, we've spent a lot of time in meetings over the past few years and reviewing reports and meeting with contractors, etc. But there's also been a lot of field work that CCF and our partners have worked on. So as I mentioned, we started water quality testing in 2023. That is conducted by me, Eli, Lauren, and trustees. So we have trustees Tim and Beth out in our little special Pokemon water testing child sailboat. They really got the short end of the stick. So they work in Inner Frostfish Creek. We have Cheryl, another trustee, out on the other side of Riders Cove with Adrian collecting data. And then these are just some pictures of some of our other contractors and partners. So up on the upper right, this is Fuss and O'Neill venturing into the bog area, which is fairly heroic. It's a very wet and squishy system that you're liable to sink in. Um, and then we also have Christina, who is our DER liaison on this project, installing a water level logger. But that's just a small snapshot of all the field work that's been taking place at Frostfish Creek. So if you want to support projects that like what I just detailed, you may have heard that in the past year, CCF launched a new initiative called Land Steward for Tomorrow. And you can specifically designate donations to that. Um, and that money will be used for restorations and preparing our lands so that they're resilient into the future. So now I can take questions if anyone has some. And also, I did forget to mention that the majority of the work on our restorations is completed by me and Eli and a band of volunteers. So we're also always looking for more volunteer support in the field or in the office.
So if you have a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, Julie. Julie,
Hi.
nice to, I really enjoyed your talk there. I've seen a lot of the stuff you've done. I've been birding at Frostfish Creek a lot of times. It is a really special property, so it's good to see the changes that are going on there. And you talked about the title stuff. And there's another property that Chatham Conservation never talks about, and I'm sure there's a reason for that. But Tom's Neck is a huge tidal area that's another very, very interesting kind of property. And I was wondering if there was any plans to do any kind of restoration there.
So not currently, and you're right, we really haven't done an assessment of the restrictions leading into that system. And are you primarily talking about like marsh restoration?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really amazing oaks back there too. But
Okay.
it's a bunch of it's a lot of salt marsh and then upland that's obviously completely like all the properties that you've worked on that you've
Mhm.
done incredible things
Mhm.
with, covered with a bunch of non-native vines.
Right. I have to say, so we will be looking more closely at that property because as I talked about that ecological restoration, or the ecological assessment that I talked about very early in the presentation, we use that as well as a few other metrics to kind of tier our properties based on like ecological value and public values.
Hmm.
And that property is in our top, I think we have like a dozen properties in what we're calling tier one, which we're going to be um, looking at much more closely. And so that Bridge Street, Tom's Neck area is one of those. Um, I will say I'm incredibly daunted by that property
I
because
bet.
it is huge. Yes, in the upland, other than when you get out into like the marshy areas, the upland is like almost totally invasively vegetated. You probably know that those like the main trees on there are white poplars and tree of heaven, which
Mhm.
are non-native and really aggressive. And I don't know. I'm not sure yet. If it would make sense to try and remove all those. And if anyone has good history on this, I've been very curious about the whole Bridge Street area because it is just like a corridor of white poplars and tree of heaven and other crazy stuff. And I'm just really curious why it ended. I'm like, suspecting there was probably some planting initiative or something. And I mean, also that area's just been developed for a very long time. But yeah, if anyone has insight, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, yeah, thanks for that. I was just, yeah, I was always interested in that area, and there's, no answers. Yeah, it'd be complicated. It's an incredibly complicated place where like the tidal flow would impact the houses over there, and it's but yeah, thank you. And again, I really do enjoy all your work walking around all these different places. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Julie? So Julie, you just mentioned about how we tiered the properties, and I mean, did you say there were 10 that we recognized as tier one?
I think it's 12 or 13. Some of that was us bunching. We have like multiple assemblages along Muddy Creek, and once we included a couple, we wanted to include all of them. But
Right.
so
So yeah, so for folks that are listening in, that's really how we're approaching um the tasks of where we're working and how much effort and energy and time and money that we can put into each of these restorations. And can't thank you enough, Julie, for all the work that you and Eli and all the volunteers do.
thank you.
Appreciate you spending your Saturdays with us, folks. Anybody have any last questions?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Um, so I know you guys are pretty out straight with everything you do, but I feel like so many others could learn from some of your restorations and like what you're doing at Mayo House is just such a great way of people seeing what can be done. But my question is, where would an entity like a church or a condo association or even a homeowner learn how to start doing some kind of a restoration like you've done? Where do they go?
So I did thank you for bringing this up because I did mean to mention, um, we do have some resources on the mini meadow restoration. So you can find a brochure, which you probably helped us with, Don, but, on the plants in the mini meadow, you can either come into our office to get one or it is on our website. We also have on our website kind of a database um, of, and I'm sure, believe me, it's not complete, but of native, non-native, and invasive plants. So if you want to learn a little bit more about identifying the plants or just what to be looking out for. And Kathy Weston also usually in the summer, she gives a few presentations at the mini meadow, which might be, if you're on like a homeowner scale, that might be a good place to start. Um, I mean, you can always come out and join us volunteering. That might be a good place to learn. And then I'm sure there's resources like, and I'm probably blanking on a lot of things now, but there's like the Ecological Landscaping Association, or um, there are just various places you can watch webinars or stuff or things like that. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I would recommend, Julie, I'd recommend the Pollinator Pathway people because they do a
okay.
lot of native things, right?
Mm-hmm.
APCC. So there's lots of
APCC
resources out there.
definitely. Yes, APCC has a really good database, like plant finder database for native plants of Cape Cod. Um,
Great.
and okay, now and the Native Plant Trust. They have what's called a garden plant finder. I actually use it a lot for work to find out properties of different plants we're using. Um, so I recommend that as well.
Well, thank you again for joining us, everyone. I hope you found this informative and hope you all have a great day. Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Julie.
Welcome.